19 years on the Massachusetts State Police Force. You learn to handle Southie gangsters, Cape Cod tourists, and Western Mass meth labs. But nothing in the academy prepares you for trooper duty in the Bridgewater Triangle. That 200 square miles of hell between Abington, Rehoboth, and Freetown, where the rules of physics are more like suggestions, and your cruiser's GPS starts showing roads that haven't existed since 1675. My name is Sergeant Michael Patrick O'Sullivan, badge number 2847, Massachusetts State Police, Troop D out of Middleborough. What I'm about to tell you violates about 17 state protocols and at least 3 federal classifications. But after what happened on Route 24 last Tuesday, after finding those 3 MIT students aged 40 years in 40 minutes, I can't stay silent anymore. If you're watching this from anywhere in New England, you've driven through the Triangle. Maybe you noticed your radio going static near exit 14. Maybe you saw lights in the Hockomock Swamp that weren't quite aircraft, weren't quite stars. Or maybe you were lucky and passed through during daylight, when it mostly pretends to be normal. But between midnight and 4 a.m., especially on foggy nights when the temperature drops below 40, the Triangle shows its true face. It was Tuesday, October 15th, 2024, 2:47 a.m. I was running radar on Route 24 northbound, just south of exit 13, though if you check your GPS right now, you'll see the exits jump from 12 to 14. Exit 13 only exists when it wants to, usually when someone needs to disappear. The call came through dispatch, Carol's voice tight with confusion. Unit 2847, we've got a 1050 reported near mile marker 18. Caller says it's, Christ, Mike. She says it's a horse-drawn carriage in the high-speed lane. I should have known right then. Should have called for backup, stayed on the perimeter like we're trained. But 19 years of muscle memory kicked in. You get a call, you respond. Unit 2847 responding, I radioed back, flipping on my lights and sirens. The fog rolled in thick as I approached mile marker 18, that New England fog that seems to swallow sound and light alike. My headlights caught something that made me slam the brakes. Not a carriage, but a brand new Tesla Model S, parked sideways across the highway. Hazards on, driver door open, no one inside. I ran the plates. The car belonged to Jennifer Chen, a 22-year-old MIT doctoral student in theoretical physics. According to the registration, she'd bought it 3 days ago. But the car looked decades old. Rust eating through the panels, seats cracked and faded, dashboard electronics corroded like they'd been exposed to salt air for years. That's when I heard the screaming. It came from the woods just off the highway, past the guardrail where the Hockomock Swamp presses close to the road. 3 voices, young, terrified. I grabbed my flashlight and portable radio, calling it in. Unit 2847, I've got potential 10-54 in progress requesting immediate backup. The radio died. Not static, not interference, complete silence. My cell phone showed no signal, though we were barely 15 miles from Boston. Even my flashlight flickered, the LED bulbs stuttering like candles in wind that didn't exist. I jumped the guardrail anyway. 20 yards into the woods, I found them. 3 kids in MIT hoodies, huddled together, their faces, Jesus Christ, their faces. When I'd run Jennifer Chen's license 10 minutes earlier, her DOB showed 2002. The woman looking back at me had gray hair, deep wrinkles, liver spots on hands that shook with advanced age. "Officer," she wheezed, her voice like autumn leaves. "We've only been here an hour. Look at us. Look what it did to us." The other 2 were in similar states, college kids in elderly bodies, their clothes hanging loose on frames that had somehow shrunk with age. One of them, a boy who couldn't have been older than 20 when the night started, was checking his pulse with fingers that trembled with palsy. 72 hours, he kept muttering. The equation showed 72 hours per minute. We didn't believe it. We had to test it. I tried to get them back to my cruiser, but Jennifer grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "Don't you understand?" she said. "We came here on purpose." We detected the anomaly from campus. Temporal distortion centered on specific coordinates. We thought we could document it, prove that time moves differently here. But it's not just time, officer, it's selective. It aged our bodies, but not our clothes. Our phones show 3 minutes have passed, but our bodies experience decades. That's when I noticed my own hands. The wedding ring I'd worn for 12 years, from the marriage that ended 3 years ago but I still wore out of habit, had worn a groove so deep into my finger that I could see bone. When I pushed back my sleeve, the watch my grandfather had given me when I graduated from the academy had rusted through the band. "We need to move," I said, though I wasn't sure which direction was safe anymore. "Stay together, don't—" The lights hit us before I could finish. Not headlights, older, flickering, like lanterns but moving too fast. Through the trees came the sound I'd been dreading since I first heard the dispatch call. Wooden wheels on gravel, horses breathing hard, the crack of a whip. The carriage burst through the underbrush like it was made of smoke, solid enough to see but passing through trees without disturbing them. The driver wore a tricorn hat and a coat that belonged in a museum, his face hidden in shadow that didn't match any light source. The horses were the worst part. Their eyes glowed like hot coals, and their hooves struck sparks from the air itself. It passed right through us. Through me, through the aged MIT students, through the space between spaces. And for a moment, just a heartbeat, I was somewhere else. Somewhen else. I stood on the same road, but it was dirt, not asphalt. The year was 1675, and King Philip's War was raging. Wampanoag warriors were fleeing colonial militia, and the road was soaked with blood that would never quite wash away. I could smell gunpowder and death, hear musket fire and screams in languages that predated English in these woods. Then I was back, gasping, my uniform soaked with sweat that felt like blood. The MIT students were unconscious, their aged bodies unable to handle the temporal shift. And standing where the carriage had passed was a figure I recognized from a photograph that had been hidden in my grandfather's effects for 50 years. It was my grandfather himself. Badge 1138. Trooper Patrick O'Sullivan, wearing his 1971 uniform, looking exactly as he had in his official portrait. The same age as when he'd disappeared for 3 days during his investigation of the Bridgewater Triangle, returning with no memory and a citation book filled with tickets written to people who'd been dead since the 1600s. "Michael," he said, his voice carrying despite the distance between us. "You weren't supposed to follow this path." The O'Sullivan line was meant to guard the perimeter, not enter the center. "Grandpa?" My voice cracked like I was 12 again, watching him teach me to field strip his service weapon in his garage in Southie. "The Triangle isn't just a place, boyo," he said, using the nickname I hadn't heard since his death in 1987. "It's a wound in time, a place where Massachusetts can't forget its sins. Every massacre, every hanging, every soul lost to prejudice and hatred. They're all still happening here, still bleeding through." He pulled out his citation book, the same one I'd found in his belongings and had been carrying in my cruiser as a good luck charm. He wrote something, tore off the ticket, and held it out to me. "This is your summons," he said. "Not to court, but to testimony. The Triangle has chosen you to witness what the state has hidden since 1971. As I reached for the ticket, his hand passed right through mine, but the paper remained solid, real, warm to the touch. Written on it was an address: Exit 13, Route 24, October 31st, 2024, 3:33 a.m. "Don't come alone," he warned, "and whatever you do, don't bring anyone with a badge." The Triangle remembers every officer who's spilled blood here, justified or not. And trust me, Michael, in Massachusetts, that's every officer since 1630. He started to fade, but not like a ghost dissolving. More like he was walking away through dimensions I couldn't perceive, taking angles through space that human eyes weren't meant to follow. "Grandpa, wait! What happened to you in 1971? What did you find?" He turned back, and for the first time I saw fear in eyes that had faced down the Winter Hill Gang without blinking. "I found out why they really built Route 24 through the Triangle, Michael. It wasn't for transportation. It was for containment. The highway is a binding circle, keeping something in, but the binding is breaking. The thing that the Wampanoag called the hunger that walks is waking up, and it's been feeding on time itself, growing stronger with every year that passes." The woods suddenly erupted with blue lights. My backup had finally arrived. 3 cruisers, lights and sirens, reality reasserting itself with all the authority of the Massachusetts State Police. My grandfather vanished like he'd never been there, but the ticket remained in my hand. Trooper Davidson was first out of his unit, weapon drawn, scanning the scene. "Jesus, Mike, what happened? You've been off comms for 3 hours. 3 hours. I'd called for backup maybe 15 minutes ago." I looked at my watch, the one that had rusted through, and saw it had been replaced by my grandfather's watch, the one he'd worn in 1971, ticking backwards at exactly 1 second per second. "We need medics," I said, gesturing to the MIT students. "And call the colonel. Tell him exit 13 is manifesting again." Davidson's face went pale. Every trooper in Massachusetts knew about exit 13, the exit that appeared on no maps, led to no towns, but somehow generated more missing person reports than the rest of the highway combined. As the EMTs loaded the aged students into ambulances, Jennifer Chen grabbed my sleeve with fingers that belonged on a 90-year-old. "We solved it," she whispered, "the equation. The Triangle isn't supernatural. It's a probability engine, a place where all possible timelines converge. Past, present, future. They're all equally real here. The indigenous people knew. They tried to warn the colonists. But the colonists built roads through it anyway, trying to impose order on chaos." She pressed a flash drive into my hand. "Everything's on there. Our readings, our calculations. The Triangle is growing, officer. Every year, it expands by approximately 0.3 miles. At this rate, it will reach Boston by 2047. And when it does..." She didn't need to finish. A city of 700,000 people suddenly experiencing all of their possible timelines simultaneously. The past and future colliding in a metropolitan area. It would be chaos on a scale that would make the Salem witch trials look like a parking dispute. As the ambulance pulled away, I stood on Route 24, looking at the spot where exit 13 should be. In the fog, I could almost see it. A off-ramp that led to somewhere, someone else. Its signs written in English, Wampanoag, and something older that hurt to read. My radio crackled to life. Carol's voice, but different. Older, younger, speaking in an accent that shifted between modern Boston and something from centuries past. "All units, be advised. We have multiple 1054s reported throughout the Triangle. Freetown State Forest reports contact with unidentified persons in colonial dress. Rehoboth PD has a family claiming their house is simultaneously built and unbuilt. And Mike, exit 13 is fully manifested. The colonel wants you to report to Troop D immediately." I keyed my radio. "Unit 2, 847 responding, en route to station." But as I drove north on Route 24, watching the mile markers count up toward where exit 13 shouldn't be, I knew I wouldn't make it to the station. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Because in my rearview mirror, following at exactly 3 car lengths, was a Massachusetts State Police cruiser from 1971, badge 1, 138 behind the wheel, my grandfather young again, and trying to warn me about something my mirrors couldn't quite reflect. The ticket he'd given me was burning in my pocket, the date approaching fast. October 31st, 2024. Halloween, the night when the veil is thinnest. But in the Bridgewater Triangle, the veil had been torn to shreds decades ago. Now, something that had been feeding on lost time and forgotten souls was about to step through. And the O'Sullivan family curse, 3 generations of state troopers, all drawn to the triangle, all eventually consumed by it, was about to claim its next victim, unless I could figure out what my grandfather had learned in 1971. Unless I could understand why they'd built highways in a perfect triangle around 200 square miles of cursed land. Unless I could stop what was coming through exit 13 before Halloween night. The fog grew thicker as I drove, and through it I could see them, thousands of them. Every person who'd ever vanished in the triangle, still here, still traveling their routes, unaware that time had left them behind. Colonial soldiers marching along paths that became highways, Wampanoag warriors running from battles that never ended, modern families in minivans, forever trying to reach destinations that no longer existed. All of them converging on exit 13. All of them waiting for October 31st. All of them hungry for something I didn't yet understand. The Troop D station in Middleborough should have been a 20-minute drive from where I'd found the MIT students. I'd been driving for 2 hours, my odometer showing I'd covered the correct distance, but Route 24 kept stretching, adding miles that didn't exist on any map. The exit numbers were wrong too. After exit 12, I passed 12A, 12B, 12C, each one leading to the same dark off-ramp that my headlights couldn't quite penetrate. My grandfather's cruiser maintained its position in my rear view, hazards flashing in a pattern I recognized from his old citation book, Morse code. DONTSTOPDONTLOO KBACK. The radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't dispatch. It was recordings, overlapping like someone was playing multiple cassette tapes simultaneously. November 3rd, 1971. Trooper O'Sullivan responding to indigenous artifacts found in highway construction. March 15th, 1979. Multiple civilian reports of triangular craft over Hockomock Swamp. October 28th, 1998. Entire Cub Scout troop missing near Profile Rock. Each transmission was from a different decade, but they all mentioned the same coordinates, the exact spot where exit 13 would manifest in 6 days. My cell phone, which had been dead since entering the Deep Triangle, suddenly blazed to life with notifications. Hundreds of them, all from the same number, all containing the same message. The binding fails at the 3rd generation. That's when I realized my speedometer had been lying. I wasn't moving at 65 miles per hour. I was barely crawling. The world outside was passing in slow motion. Headlights from other vehicles stretching into long ribbons of light. But inside the cruiser, time moved normally. I was caught between seconds, suspended in a moment that refused to end. I made a decision that went against every protocol. I took the next exit, even though it was labeled 12F and definitely hadn't existed when I'd driven this route 12 hours earlier during daylight. The off-ramp descended at an impossible angle, corkscrewing down into fog that grew thicker with each revolution. My altimeter, which I'd installed after too many foggy nights on these roads, showed I was now 200 feet below sea level. In Massachusetts, 40 miles from the ocean, the road leveled out into a scene from another century. Gas lamps lined a cobblestone street. Horse-drawn carriages sat parked outside buildings with hand-painted signs advertising blacksmiths and apothecaries. But modern cars were there too, their drivers slumped over steering wheels, their faces frozen in expressions of confusion and terror. I recognized some of them from missing person reports going back decades. A family from 1987, still in their wood-paneled station wagon. A teenager from 2003, her flip phone still in her hand, the screen showing she'd been trying to call 911 for 21 years. My radio burst to life with my grandfather's voice, clear as if he were sitting beside me. "Michael, you've entered the pocket." It's where the Triangle stores everything it takes. Every person, every moment, every sin that Massachusetts wants to forget. Get to the old meeting house. That's where they keep the records. The meeting house stood at the center of the impossible town, looking exactly as it had in 1676 when it was built, and also as it would look in 2076, simultaneously new and ancient, wooden and digital, all states existing at once. The doors were open, and inside, hundreds of people sat in pews, unmoving, unblinking, watching something at the pulpit that my eyes couldn't quite focus on. I walked down the center aisle, my boots echoing on floorboards that shifted between wood, stone, and materials that wouldn't be invented for decades. Each person I passed was from a different era. Puritan settlers, Revolutionary War soldiers, Irish immigrants from the 1840s, suburban families from the 1960s, tech workers from the 2020s. All of them trapped in a permanent congregation, witnessing something eternal and terrible. At the pulpit stood three figures I'd only seen in history books and classified files. Cotton Mather, the minister who'd overseen the Salem witch trials, though he looked younger than his portraits, his eyes burning with religious fervor and something else, knowledge that God wasn't what he'd thought. King Philip, or Metacomet, the Wampanoag chief who'd led the bloodiest war in American history per capita, his wounds still fresh, still bleeding, as if the war had never ended. And between them, wearing a suit that belonged to no particular era, was someone I'd seen in newspaper photos from the 1970s, James Whitey Bulger, the Boston crime boss who'd supposedly been killed in federal prison in 2018. "Welcome, Trooper O'Sullivan," Bulger said, his South Boston accent thick as ever. "We've been waiting for someone with your particular qualifications." 3 generations of cops, all touched by the Triangle, all carrying the same burden in their blood. "You're dead," I said, my hand moving to my service weapon. "Everyone's dead here, kid. And everyone's alive. That's the thing about the Triangle. It doesn't recognize the difference. Your grandfather learned that in 71. Tried to stop it, tried to break the binding, but he didn't understand what he was dealing with." King Philip stepped forward, and when he spoke, it was in perfect English, despite his lips moving in Wampanoag. "Your people built roads to contain what they feared, but roads go both directions. Every highway through our land became a channel for the old powers to flow. Route 24, Route 44, I-495. They form a trinity of asphalt, a modern reproduction of something my people knew to avoid." Cotton Mather's voice was like dried leaves. "We thought we were bringing God's order to savage lands. But the land was already ordered, just by different laws. Laws that preceded Christ, preceded Moses, preceded human memory. The trials in Salem were not about witches. They were about silencing those who'd made contact with what dwells here." "What dwells here?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. Bulger laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The hungry dark, kid. The thing that eats time itself. It's been here since before the continents split, feeding on paradoxes, growing fat on contradictions. And Massachusetts, we're nothing but contradictions. Founded on freedom, built on slavery, preaching tolerance, practicing genocide. Every hypocrisy feeds it. The congregation suddenly stirred, hundreds of heads turning to look at me in perfect synchronization. Their eyes were gone, replaced by swirling vortexes of temporal energy, showing glimpses of their deaths, their births, their entire existence compressed into pupils of pure possibility. Exit 13 is its mouth, King Philip continued. Every Halloween, when the boundary between worlds weakens, it opens wider. Your grandfather discovered this. He tried to close it by driving every possible route through the triangle simultaneously, existing in all timelines at once, hoping to confuse the hunger. But all he did was fragment himself across decades. That's when I understood why I'd been seeing my grandfather's cruiser. It wasn't following me, it was warning me. He was still out there, still driving, still trying to complete his circuit from 1971. 53 years of the same shift, the same night, the same desperate attempt to keep Exit 13 from fully manifesting. My phone buzzed with an incoming text from a number that was just zeros. Check your trunk. I'd never looked in my trunk since starting this shift. A standard equipment check was always done at start of watch, but tonight, I'd been distracted by the MIT student's call. I have to go, I said, backing toward the door. You can't leave, Mather said, his voice gaining the thunderous quality of his sermons. You're part of the congregation now. Everyone who enters the pocket becomes a part of the eternal witness. But I was already running, crashing through doors that aged decades with each step. My cruiser was where I'd left it, but it had aged too. Rust spreading across the hood like cancer, the light bar cracked and dim, the MDT, mobile data, terminal showing records from cases that hadn't happened yet. I popped the trunk. Inside was a collection of items that shouldn't exist together. My grandfather's complete case files from 1971, still smelling of his lucky strikes. A hard drive labeled MIT Temporal Study 2024 that Jennifer Chen must have hidden before they'd encountered whatever aged them. A Wampanoag war club carved with symbols that hurt to look at. And a leather journal written in my own handwriting, dated October 31st, 2024, 6 days in the future. I grabbed the journal, flipping to the last entry. If you're reading this, it means the loop is starting again. I've been through this 17 times now, each Halloween. Each time trying to stop Exit 13 from opening fully. The problem isn't the exit, it's what's underneath it. In 1971, when they built Route 24, they didn't do a proper archaeological survey. They built directly over a mass grave from King Philip's War, but not just any grave. This was where they buried the Wampanoag shamans, the ones who'd tried to call down something to fight the colonists. They succeeded, but too late. The thing they summoned has been feeding ever since, growing stronger with each tragedy Massachusetts tries to forget. The triangle isn't haunted, it's pregnant. And on Halloween 2024, it's going to give birth. The only way to stop it is the entry cut off, the rest of the pages blank except for a single line. The O'Sullivans were never cops. We were always priests. The badge was just camouflage. A hand fell on my shoulder. I spun, expecting Bulger or one of the others, but it was a woman in a Massachusetts State Police uniform, her badge reading O'Sullivan, M. My name, my badge number. But she was clearly from the 1980s, her hair in that decade's distinctive style, her equipment outdated but well maintained. You're my son, she said simply. Or you will be. Time's complicated here. I'm Trooper Margaret O'Sullivan. I married into the family, took the name, joined the force. I thought I was investigating the Freetown State Forest cult murders in 1983. Instead, I found this. Mom died when I was 3, I said. Car accident. Dad raised me alone. She smiled sadly. That's what they told you. But there are no accidents in the triangle. I've been here, in the pocket, keeping the congregation from spilling out into reality. Every O'Sullivan has a role. Your grandfather patrols eternally. I maintain the barrier, and you're supposed to break the cycle. How? By doing what no O'Sullivan has ever done, telling the truth. The state has known about the triangle since the Pilgrims landed. They've been managing it, containing it, feeding it just enough tragedy to keep it from erupting. Every war, every crisis, every moment of injustice in Massachusetts history has been partially engineered to keep the hungry dark satisfied. She handed me a set of keys I didn't recognize. These open every lock in the triangle, every door that shouldn't exist, every vault where they keep the real histories. But once you use them, once you reveal what's really here, there's no going back. The state will come for you, not just the police, the ones who've been managing this since 1620. Before I could respond, my radio exploded with static. Then Carol's voice, but wrong, speaking in reverse. 13 ticks E, 13 ticks E, L.A. Stinu Denopser. My mother, this impossible version of my dead mother, grabbed my shoulders. It's starting early. Halloween isn't the deadline, it's the backup plan. Exit 13 is manifesting now. You have to get back to Route 24 before the world lurched. Reality hiccuped. Suddenly, I was back in my cruiser doing 95 on Route 24. No memory of how I'd returned from the pocket. My grandfather's cruiser was gone. The radio was normal. My MDT showed the time as 4:47 a.m., October 16th, 2024. But in my hand, I still held the keys my mother had given me. And in my rearview mirror, I could see Exit 13, fully manifested. Its off-ramp spiraling up instead of down, leading to a darkness that moved like something alive. Traffic was already taking the exit. Not intentionally, their cars were being pulled, diverted, drawn like iron filings to a magnet. I watched a minivan full of what looked like a family on their way to Logan Airport suddenly veer across 3 lanes and disappear up the impossible ramp. I had to make a choice. Follow protocol. Report to Troop D. Pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen. Or use the keys, open the doors that had been locked since the Mayflower Compact was signed, and reveal why Massachusetts really built highways through the most dangerous 200 square miles in North America. My phone rang. The caller ID showed a number that was just my badge number repeated. 2847-2847-2847. I answered. It was my own voice, tired, older, speaking from some other, when every loop you reach this point. Every loop you have to decide. 17 times you've chosen to investigate. Each time you learn more, but lose something. I've lost fingers, years, memories, entire decades of existence, but this time is different. This time, you have Mom's keys. This time, you can open the vault under Anawan Rock. This time, you might actually stop it instead of just delaying it another year. What's in the vault? The original binding. The treaty between the Wampanoag and the thing they summoned. Written in blood on deerskin, signed by both human and inhuman hands. Destroy it, and Exit 13 closes forever. But preserve it, and you become the next guardian. The next O'Sullivan doomed to patrol these roads until someone else breaks the cycle. The line went dead. In the distance, I could hear sirens, every emergency vehicle in southeastern Massachusetts responding to something. My MDT lit up with calls. Multiple 10 to 50 seconds on Route 24. Civilian reports of Colonial Army on I-495. Freetown State Forest. God help us, the trees are walking. Halloween was still 2 weeks away, but the triangle wasn't waiting anymore. The hungry dark was waking up, and I had a set of keys that could either save Massachusetts or doom it to face every sin it had tried to bury. Anawan Rock sits in Rehoboth, right in the heart of the triangle. It's where Chief Anawan surrendered to Captain Benjamin Church in 1676, ending King Philip's War. Every Massachusetts school kid learns this. What they don't learn is that Anawan didn't surrender. He made a deal. And the rock isn't just a historical marker, it's a door. I reached the rock at 5:23 a.m., October 16th. The parking area was empty except for 3 vehicles. A National Park Service truck that looked like it had been there since the 1970s. Windows covered in dust so thick I couldn't see inside. A Tesla with Rhode Island plates, still running, its autopilot desperately trying to navigate back to the road while something invisible held it in place. And a horse tied to a tree that shouldn't exist, wearing Continental Army tack from 1776. The keys my mother had given me were growing warm in my pocket, each one resonating with different frequencies as I approached the rock. They weren't normal keys. Some were made of bone, others of metals that seemed to shift between copper and silver depending on the angle, and one that appeared to be carved from a single piece of obsidian that reflected faces that weren't there. My radio crackled. Unit 2847, return to station immediately. Colonel's orders. I ignored it. I'd passed the point of following orders when I'd seen Exit 13 swallowing that minivan full of innocents. The rock itself was exactly as every historical photo showed. A large glacial boulder with a plaque commemorating the surrender. But with the keys in my hand, I could see more. Symbols writhed beneath the surface of the stone like living things, Wampanoag petroglyphs that predated any human presence in North America, interwoven with others that hurt to perceive directly, geometric patterns that suggested dimensions beyond the 3 we pretend are all that exist. The obsidian key slid into a crack in the rock that hadn't been there seconds before. Reality shuddered. The stone split open not like a door, but like a wound, revealing stairs that descended into absolute darkness. Not the absence of light, the active presence of dark, thick, and viscous like oil. I turned on my flashlight. The beam penetrated maybe 3 feet before being swallowed, but those 3 feet showed stone steps carved with warnings in a dozen languages: Wampanoag, English, Latin, and others I didn't recognize. One phrase repeated, "The compact must hold." I descended. The temperature dropped 10 degrees with each step. My breath came out in clouds that fell upward, defying gravity. After what felt like 100 steps but my Fitbit claimed was only 7, the passage opened into a vast chamber that couldn't possibly fit under Anawan Rock. It was the size of Fenway Park, the ceiling lost in darkness that my light couldn't reach. The walls were covered in filing cabinets, thousands of them, extending in rows that hurt to follow with human eyes, each one labeled with dates ranging from 1620 to 2024. But some labels showed dates that hadn't happened yet: 2025, 2047, 2089. One entire section was simply labeled Never. In the center of the chamber sat a desk that belonged in a colonial courthouse, and behind it sat someone I recognized from my Massachusetts history classes, William Bradford, first governor of Plymouth Colony. Except he was still alive, still writing in a massive ledger with a quill that dripped something darker than ink. Trooper O'Sullivan, he said without looking up. Badge 2847. Third generation Guardian, first generation to reach the archive. Your mother had the keys for 6 years before the Triangle took her. Your grandfather never even knew it existed. But you're on schedule. Schedule for what? He finally looked up, and his eyes were mirrors, reflecting not my face, but every face that had ever lived and died in Massachusetts. Millions of them, compressed into pupils of pure historical weight. The hungry dark isn't a monster, Trooper. It's a debt. When my people came to this land, we made a bargain. The Wampanoag shamans had already awakened something ancient, something that had slept beneath these lands since before the Ice Age. They couldn't control it, couldn't stop it from devouring their people. So, when we arrived, a deal was struck. He stood, and his form flickered between his pilgrim appearance and something else, a thing of contracts and compromises held together by broken promises and justified atrocities. We would feed it, he continued, small amounts, controlled doses of tragedy and injustice, just enough to keep it sleeping. Every war, every massacre, every accident has been carefully orchestrated to maintain the balance. The Triangle is its feeding ground, and the highways were built to deliver its meals efficiently. The MIT students approached too close to the truth. Their equations would have revealed the entire system, so the Triangle aged them, made their testimony unreliable. Who believes elderly people claiming to be college students? I thought of Jennifer Chen, her young mind trapped in a 90-year-old body, holding a flash drive with evidence no one would ever take seriously. But the system is breaking down, Bradford admitted. We've run out of acceptable tragedies. Society has developed conscience, accountability. We can't orchestrate massacres anymore without global scrutiny. The hungry dark is starving, and Exit 13 is its mouth opening wide to feed properly for the first time since 1676. So let it starve, let it die. Bradford laughed, a sound like documents burning. You can't starve something that exists outside of time. If it doesn't feed here, it will feed everywhere. The Triangle will expand exponentially. First Boston, then New England, then the entire East Coast. Every historical trauma will manifest simultaneously. The Revolutionary War, the Civil War, every moment of suffering will replay in real time. Millions will die, and their deaths will feed it retroactively, making it stronger in the past, creating paradoxes that will unravel causality itself. He opened a filing cabinet labeled 2024 Contingency and pulled out a thick folder with my name on it. Every O'Sullivan has been bred for this moment, he said, spreading documents across the desk. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, death certificates, all showing how my family line had been carefully cultivated over centuries. Your bloodline carries a specific genetic marker, a compatibility with temporal manipulation. You can survive exposure to the hungry dark longer than most. Long enough to make the choice. What choice? Renew the compact or break it. Feed the hungry dark its greatest meal, yourself, a guardian with 3 generations of temporal energy accumulated in your bloodline, and by humanity another century of carefully managed tragedy. Or destroy the compact and let the Triangle expand uncontrolled. There has to be another option. There is, said a new voice. From between the filing cabinets stepped Dr. Jennifer Chen, but not as I'd left her, elderly and frail. This version was her actual age, 22, wearing clothes that seemed to be cut from space itself. Dark fabric shot through with stars that actually twinkled. You're still in the ambulance, I said. I'm in many places, she replied. The aging effect had an unexpected consequence. My consciousness got stretched across multiple time frames. I exist in 2024, 2094, and several points between. I've had 70 years to study the triangle from the inside, even though only hours have passed in baseline reality. She pulled out a device that looked like a smartphone crossed with a Ouija board, its screen showing equations that moved like living things. The hungry dark isn't malevolent, she explained. It's a quantum consciousness that experiences all time simultaneously. To it, past, present, and future are the same moment. It doesn't understand linear causality, doesn't comprehend that when it feeds on tragedy, it creates suffering for individual conscious beings. It's like a whale feeding on plankton. No malice, just incomprehensible scale. So we can communicate with it. We can teach it. Show it that consciousness exists in discrete packets, not as a continuous field. Make it understand that its feeding causes pain to individual entities, not just ripples in the temporal substrate. Bradford slammed his ledger shut. Impossible. We've tried communication for 4 centuries. It doesn't recognize us as anything more than food. Because you've been speaking the wrong language, Jennifer said. She turned to me. The keys your mother gave you, they're not just for opening doors. They're tuning forks, each one resonating at frequencies that the hungry dark can perceive. Together, they form a chord that translates human consciousness into something it can understand. My radio erupted with my grandfather's voice clear as day. Michael, exit 13 is expanding. Cars are disappearing by the dozens. The state police are setting up roadblocks, but they can't stop people from taking an exit that exists in their peripheral vision. You need to decide now. I looked at the keys in my hand. 7 of them, each one humming with different energies. Then at Bradford, guardian of a 4-century-old atrocity. Then at Jennifer, split across timelines but holding what might be hope. Where's the compact? I asked Bradford. He gestured to his ledger. I am the compact. Every treaty, every agreement, every compromise Massachusetts ever made is written in my pages. I'm not William Bradford. I'm the living embodiment of the state's historical contracts. Destroy me, and every legal framework Massachusetts ever created dissolves. Property rights, citizenship, everything returns to a state of legal vacuum. But keep me, he continued, and the feeding continues. Controlled, managed, but endless. Small tragedies to prevent large ones. A few disappearances to prevent mass catastrophe. Jennifer stepped forward. There's a third option. Rewrite the compact. Not between Massachusetts and the hungry dark, but between humanity and it. A teaching contract instead of a feeding contract. She pulled out the flash drive she'd given me earlier, except I still had that one in my pocket. This was a different one, from a future where she'd had decades to perfect her calculations. This contains a translation protocol. Upload it to the triangle's electromagnetic field, use the state police communication array, it's powerful enough, and we can start teaching the hungry dark about individual consciousness, about suffering, about empathy. And if it doesn't want to learn, I asked, then we're no worse off than we are now. But if it does. She smiled, and I saw hope in eyes that had seen too many timelines. If it does, the triangle becomes something else. Not a wound or a feeding ground, but a classroom where 2 incomprehensible forms of consciousness learn to coexist. My phone buzzed with an emergency alert. Take shelter. Avoid all highways. Temporal anomaly expanding. Through the ceiling of the underground chamber, I could somehow see Route 24. Exit 13 had grown from a simple off-ramp to a massive spiral of asphalt and impossibility, pulling in cars from miles away. But worse, I could see what was coming through from the other side. Not creatures or monsters, but pure temporal chaos. The Battle of Bunker Hill superimposed over modern Charlestown. The Boston Tea Party happening simultaneously with a Red Sox game at Fenway. All of Massachusetts history trying to happen at once. "Choose, Trooper O'Sullivan," Bradford said. "Feed it, free it, or try to teach it. But choose now, because in about 30 seconds the hungry dark is going to realize you're here, in its nerve center, holding keys that can unlock or destroy everything we've built to contain it." The stone ceiling began to crack, not from pressure but from paradox. It was simultaneously solid rock and empty space, existing and not existing, old and new and never was. Through the cracks, I could see 1,000 eyes that weren't eyes, a mouth that existed in more dimensions than human geometry could describe, and a hunger that had been building since before the solar system formed. The hungry dark had found us, and it was curious what we were doing in its carefully maintained food supply. The hungry dark descended into the chamber like ink poured into water, but ink that moved with purpose, with curiosity, with an intelligence so vast that my human brain could only process fragments of its attention. Where it touched the filing cabinets, they aged millennia in seconds, then reversed, becoming new, then crumbling again in endless loops. Bradford screamed, not in pain but in paradox, his composite existence of 4 centuries of contracts trying to maintain coherence against something that didn't recognize linear time. He flickered between every governor Massachusetts ever had, every treaty maker, every authority figure who'd signed their name to contain this thing. Jennifer moved with impossible speed, her multiple timeline existence giving her the ability to be in several places at once. She grabbed my hand, pressed the flash drive into it, and spoke in overlapping voices from different decades. The communication tower at Blue Hills Observatory, still operational, can broadcast the translation protocol. But you need to establish resonance first. The keys are the bridge. Play them like an instrument. Her instructions came jumbled, past and future versions of herself speaking simultaneously. But I understood. The keys weren't just keys. They were notes in a chord that could harmonize with something beyond human comprehension. The hungry dark focused on me, and suddenly I was everywhere and everywhen at once. I was with the pilgrims, watching them make first contact with the Wampanoag, feeling the moment when 2 incompatible worldviews collided and created the first crack that would become the triangle. I was at Salem watching the trials, understanding that the accused weren't witches, but people who'd accidentally glimpsed what lurked beneath Massachusetts' foundations. I was with my grandfather in 1971, watching him discover the truth and make the desperate decision to fragment himself across time, rather than let Exit 13 fully manifest. I was with my mother in 1983, seeing her realize that the Freetown State Forest murders weren't done by human cultists but by the hungry dark itself, sampling human consciousness to understand what it was eating. And I was in futures that might be Boston consumed by temporal chaos, the entire East Coast experiencing all of its history simultaneously, humanity learning to coexist with entities that experienced reality in ways we couldn't imagine. "Choose," the hungry dark said, not in words, but in pure concept, transmitted directly into my consciousness. "Feed/teach/break/maintain/evolve/choose/choose/choose." I held up the 7 keys, each one singing at a different frequency. My badge, 2847, wasn't random. It was a harmonic sequence, the exact frequencies needed to establish communication. 2 octaves, 8 perfect fifth intervals, 4 augmented fourths, 7 resonance points. I struck the obsidian key against my badge. The sound that emerged wasn't sound. It was meaning itself, traveling through dimensions that didn't have names. The hungry dark paused. For the first time in 4 billion years, something had spoken to it in its own language. I struck the second key, the bone one. Another note, harmonizing with the first. The equation Jennifer had shown me wasn't math, it was music. A composition that could teach empathy to something that existed outside of emotional reality. Bradford tried to stop me, his ledger hands reaching for the keys, but Jennifer held him back with equations that canceled out his historical weight. "Let him try," she said, with the authority of someone who'd seen how this ended in 17 different timelines. The third key, the fourth, the fifth, each one adding layers to a song that had never been sung before. I could feel my grandfather's presence, his eternal patrol becoming part of the rhythm. My mother's barrier maintenance becoming harmony. Every O'Sullivan who'd ever worn a badge adding their voice to a chorus that transcended time. The sixth key opened a harmony that shouldn't exist. Notes that human ears couldn't hear but human souls could feel. Through it, I transmitted everything. Every human joy, every sorrow, every moment of individual consciousness experiencing reality, 1 second at a time. It understands partially, the hungry dark responded. Linear beings, sequential experience, each moment discrete, not continuous. Feeding causes, cessation? Death, I said aloud, though speaking seemed primitive compared to this form of communication. When you feed on our tragedies, individual consciousnesses stop existing. They don't transform or transcend. They end. The seventh key was different from the others. It wasn't matter at all, but crystallized time. A fragment of the original moment when the hungry dark first encountered human consciousness in 1620. When I struck it, instead of sound, it produced memory, the Pilgrim's Landing, but from the hungry dark's perspective. To it, the Mayflower hadn't arrived. It had always been there, would always be there, was arriving continuously in an eternal now. The colonization of Massachusetts wasn't a historical event, but a constant state. Every tragedy wasn't past, but perpetually present. It did not comprehend endings, it said, and for the first time, I heard something like regret in its communication. To us, all moments are now. The feeding seemed like interaction, not consumption. Jennifer's equations flickered in the air around us, translating the massive consciousness into something we could comprehend. It thought it was playing with us, she said, her voice filled with wonder and horror. Like a child pulling wings off flies, not understanding they can't grow back. So we teach it, I said, holding up the flash drive. Show it how we experience reality. Help it understand consequences. Willing to learn, the hungry dark confirmed. But hungry still. 4 centuries of feeding pattern established. Difficult to stop. Bradford, still flickering between historical figures, laughed bitterly. You can't teach something that old, that vast. It will pretend to learn while continuing to feed. That's what predators do. But I remembered something from my grandfather's citation book, a note he'd written in the margin. Even the worst speeders slow down when they understand why the limit exists. What if we don't stop the feeding, I said, an idea forming. What if we transform it? I thought about the MIT students' research, about temporal energy, about the possibility of experiencing multiple time frames simultaneously without losing individual consciousness. Instead of feeding on tragedies, what if it fed on experiences? Shared consciousness, not consumed but experienced together. Like a ride-along program, but for interdimensional entities? Jennifer's equations exploded into new configurations. That could work. Voluntary temporal sharing, humans experiencing non-linear time temporarily, the hungry dark experiencing linear consciousness without destroying it. Interested, curious, willing to attempt. Bradford's composite form solidified into something new. Not the governor, not the living contract, but the actual spirit of Massachusetts itself. Every contradiction and compromise that defined the state. "You're proposing symbiosis instead of parasitism," he said slowly. "The triangle becomes not a wound, but what? A temporal embassy?" "A teaching hospital," I said. "Where both species learn to understand each other. Where humans can experience time as the hungry dark does. Safely, temporarily. And where it can learn to value individual consciousness, to understand that each life is unique and irreplaceable." I uploaded Jennifer's translation protocol through my radio, the signal boosted by the key's resonance. Every communication tower in Massachusetts became part of the network, broadcasting a new kind of compact, not written in blood on deerskin, but encoded in electromagnetic frequencies that both humans and the hungry dark could perceive. Exit 13 shuddered, its spiral of impossibility beginning to stabilize. Not closing, not expanding, but transforming into something else. A gateway that went both ways, controlled, consensual. "The teaching begins," the hungry dark announced, and for the first time in 4 centuries, it began to withdraw from the triangle. Not completely, it maintained a presence, like an embassy in foreign territory, but the random disappearances stopped. The temporal anomalies became predictable, manageable. The chamber around us began to shift. The filing cabinets became computer servers. The colonial desk became a modern workstation. Bradford's ledger became a digital database. The archive was updating itself, transforming from a record of tragedies to a library of shared experiences. "Your grandfather can stop driving now," Bradford said, and he seemed relieved. "The eternal patrol is over. Your mother can lower the barriers. The O'Sullivan curse is broken." Through the ceiling, I could see Route 24 returning to normal. Exit 13 was still there, but it had exit signs now. Proper ones, in English and in scripts that hurt to read but no longer seemed malevolent. "Temporal Exchange Program. Authorized personnel only. Next right." My radio crackled to life. It was Carol from dispatch, but her voice was different, awed rather than afraid. "All units, be advised. The temporal anomaly has stabilized. Mass State Police, in cooperation with something I can't pronounce, has established the Bridgewater Triangle Temporal Research Station. All missing persons from the last 72 hours have been recovered, alive, but requiring medical evaluation for temporal displacement syndrome." I climbed back up through Anawan Rock, emerging into a dawn that looked exactly like every other Massachusetts October morning. Gray, cold, promising rain later. But everything had changed. Jennifer Chen was waiting by my cruiser, young again, or still, or always. Time was negotiable now. She held a badge I didn't recognize, something between FBI, NASA, and something that hadn't been invented yet. "Interdimensional Relations Division," she said. "We're going to need officers who understand both linear and nonlinear time." Interested, I looked at my own badge, 2847, the number that had turned out to be the key to everything. "I need to finish my shift first. Write some tickets, normal cop stuff. Make sure reality still works the way it's supposed to." She smiled. Reality never worked the way it was supposed to in Massachusetts. We just got better at hiding it, but now we don't have to hide anymore. My phone buzzed with a text from a number that was all 7s. "Thank you, grandson. The road is finally clear. Patrick O'Sullivan, badge 1138. Another text from all eights. The barriers are down. Coming home. Tell your father I'll be late for dinner by about 40 years. Dash Mom. As I drove away from Anawan Rock, I passed exit 13. It looked almost normal now, except for the signs and languages that shouldn't exist and the fact that the cars taking it were driving into a sky that showed stars from different centuries. The triangle was still there, still dangerous, still impossible. But it wasn't hungry anymore. It was learning. And so were we. I pulled someone over for speeding near exit 14, a completely normal traffic stop. No temporal anomalies, no interdimensional entities, just a guy from Brockton late for work. As I wrote him a ticket, he said something that made me pause. "Officer, is it true what they're saying about the triangle becoming some kind of school?" I handed him his citation. "Drive safe, especially between midnight and 4 a.m. The road rules are different now, but they're still rules." He drove off, and I sat in my cruiser, looking at the keys my mother had given me. They weren't humming anymore. Their job was done. But I kept them on my keychain next to my cruiser keys, a reminder that sometimes the best way to stop something from devouring you is to teach it that you're more interesting alive than consumed. My radio came to life with a routine call. Vandalism at a rest stop, probably teenagers. "Unit 2847 responding," I said, pulling onto Route 24. Just another night shift in Massachusetts, where the past never quite stays buried. The future keeps bleeding through, and the state police patrol the boundaries between realities, writing tickets to entities that exist in more dimensions than our training covers. But at least now the highways are safe, mostly. Between midnight and 4 a.m., though, I'd still recommend taking Route 495 instead. Exit 13 might be stabilized, but it still remembers being hungry. And sometimes, when the fog rolls in just right and the temperature drops below 40, you can still hear it whispering, learning, growing, understanding, but still so hungry to know more. That's when I drive a little faster, badge 2847 catching the dashboard light, reminding me that some numbers are more than numbers, some roads are more than roads, and in Massachusetts, history never really ends, it just keeps taking new exits. Welcome to the Bridgewater Triangle. Please drive carefully. The timeline you save might be your own.